All right, we might begin. So, welcome to the first session this afternoon in this stream and Leigha Dark's presentation on implementing evidence-based keyword sign practices within our natural settings. I'll also mention again for people who haven't been here earlier today that we do have a tech support person in the room. Put your hand up, I think, given the chat isn't working, if you need some tech help. Also to mention that we are recording all of these sessions for people that couldn't attend, so be mindful of that if you don't want to be seen or heard. Okay, and now it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Leigha Dark to present this session. Leigha is a speech pathologist and the parent of a child who's using keyword sign. Leigha is a keyword sign presenter since nearly the beginning of the millennium. Been using keyword sign personally and professionally since then. Leigha, for a number of years, worked as a lecturer in speech pathology at the Australian Catholic University and then Western Sydney University, and supported a number of honours students to complete research in this field, about which I'm absolutely delighted, and I want everyone to keep doing that. Leigha is passionate about the dissemination of keyword sign information and is actively involved, again to my delight, with the redesign and rollout of the new training packages, and I'll talk a bit more about those later on today. And currently Leigha is working for Cerebral Palsy Alliance as a knowledge translation consultant. So, Leigha, more than happy to have you here. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Libby. Can I just confirm you can see the presentation okay?
Yes.
Excellent, lovely. All right, so thank you for the opportunity to present from a slightly different perspective than what I normally do. But I've called this presentation "Implementing Evidence-Based Keyword Sign Practices in Our Natural Settings," because I'm going to talk about what it's like to know the evidence, but have to do the evidence in your own personal life, and what we do as a family to try and bring that to life for our little girl. So I'll go a little bit into some keyword sign research and evidence, but only at a very top level. Talk a little bit about the professional perspective that I've come from, I guess, in the past with thinking about keyword sign evidence and knowledge translation, but then also look at now what our personal journey is like in terms of interpreting that evidence and actually applying it in our family setting for Ilanthi, our child, and with her community around her as well. So in terms of the keyword sign research and evidence, you've probably heard, if you've been to some of the research streams and also from Nicola this morning, that it is still a small but growing evidence base that is specifically focused on keyword sign as a strategy. And that's a really positive thing. And there are quite a number of communication outcomes that are the focus of that research. So asking questions like, does keyword sign work for this purpose? Who does it work for? How much and how do we do it in order to achieve these communication outcomes? Along with some really rich qualitative work happening as well about experiences of using keyword sign. I think we could probably summarise the state, if you like, of the evidence as showing positive effects, so really promising information about the value of keyword sign, yet modest still in terms of the size of the effects or the changes that we see in the studies. So overall, using, if you like, a traffic light level of grading evidence or thinking about evidence, keyword sign as a body, I think, is still probably at that yellow light level, insofar as it's probably do it. You know, we've got some good things happening. You would want to implement what we know, but also measure it and adapt it in relation to the person that you're using it with, and keep an eye on whether it is actually helping you achieve the outcomes that you're wanting to use it for. So as a speech pathologist, that's my background. We get taught a lot about evidence-based practice, and really, to summarise what this is, it's about doing the right things for the right person at the right time in their journey, in the right way for the result that you really want to see. So for the best result. And you're probably familiar, if you have done any study in evidence-based practice, of the 3 circle type diagrams that show that we have to integrate what's available in the research evidence, so the best available research, with what we know about the person that we're working with, so their individual preferences, their characteristics, what the family feels is important, their values, along with other resources like what a clinician brings in terms of their experience and expertise as well. And I like this model from Satterfield that shows that we pull these things together in order to make good decisions about what we do in our clinical practice. And very often that does happen in the context of an organisation or a particular environment. So this is what I learned about evidence-based practice, and that's what guided me sort of professionally. We are starting to hear a lot more about this idea of knowledge translation as well. And that is, well, how do you take what we know from the evidence and put it into practice? So actually get it out into the settings where that research needs to be used. And knowledge translation is really about bridging that gap between what we know and what we actually do. And this definition here comes from an organisation in Canada called CanChild, and talks about knowledge translation as being creating evidence, pulling it together or synthesizing it, and then disseminating it in a way that's user friendly, that's accessible, that's relevant and meaningful for individuals and their families and the people who support them. And we need people creating that evidence, but we also need people knowing how to apply that evidence as well. So, my professional journey to date has spanned a clinical career as a speech pathologist, an academic sojourn, so into Australian Catholic University and Western Sydney University, which I thoroughly enjoyed, connecting with and supporting industry groups like Keyword Sign Australia in sort of advocacy and information about keyword sign. And that's been fabulous. I've been very comfortable in that space and the way to use EBP in those spaces. But now I guess our journey, or my journey, has taken a little bit more of a personal bent to it with the birth of my daughter Ilanthe, or we call her Isla. She's now 4. She has Down syndrome. And so the question I've had to ask myself is, what do I do now that I'm in a different circle? I'm no longer the clinician circle of implementing best available research. I mean, I am, but I'm actually more so for Isla in that parent and family circle. So, what does my evidence based practice and knowledge translation journey look like in that space? So I've tried to think about the way we've pulled research and tried to access what we know about keyword sign. And I conceptualize it as a bit like a puzzle, really. You know, we're trying to piece together what Isla's evidence-based practice informed puzzle looks like. And there's many more pieces than this, but in terms of communication and particularly keyword sign and AAC, these were 4 areas that were really, really critical, that I knew about from the evidence, that I wanted to make sure made it into our application within our family and Isla's community. And that is the concept, obviously, of multimodal communication and augmented input, the importance of gesture, the concept of language stimulation, and also a real focus on early literacy experiences. So I'll talk to each of those as I go through. So I like to think in terms of both as a clinician, but also in my current knowledge translation role and now as a parent, in terms of give it to me as a bottom line actionable message. What do I take away from this body of research that is something I can do right now in all of my different contexts? So our first body of literature that we wanted to make sure was present was the idea of multimodality. So, right from the beginning of Isla's communication journey, it was about committing to a multimodal approach, starting early to get multiple methods into her communication suite, both receptively and expressively, and using this concept of augmented input, so actually using the various modes of communication to communicate with her right from the start. So our multimodal approach for her included keyword sign very early on, so pretty much from birth, but really in a concerted way from about 6 months on. Um, Introducing some low tech AAC quite early, not because we expected her to use it expressively, but to show that it was a valid and valued part of her multimodal options. And then also looking at the role of speech generating devices, so technology quite early on as well. I've included a slide of research evidence. They are journal articles, but in many cases you can go to websites that have synthesized evidence, and certainly with the new Keyword Sign Australia website coming up, looking at the evidence summaries that will be growing in time and summarizing some of these key papers has been really, really helpful. But what I really was looking for was people who were showing that early access to multimodal communication options was what we should be aiming for children who would be known to have communication needs throughout their life, which we knew Isla would. So there's some lovely work here from Romsky and Sevchik, so reflecting on early intervention and AAC, looking at the effectiveness of interventions that include, for example, aided and unaided AAC, and also looking at some work by Lara Vandermeer and her colleagues about the fact that people have preferences for their communication modes. And you can only show your preference if you've got access to a range of them, of choices. So actually getting that choice in nice and early was really important. So what does that look like for us? Our keyword sign journey very early on was routines. It was nursery rhymes, songs. We had a little dabble with visual scene displays early on before Isla was really doing much expressively, but just to show her that when you interact with a screen and you point at something, you can get, language coming back at you. So we used photos of her that were very action based to get that vocabulary in there. She has a little low-tech communication book based on topics with some core vocabulary, which she's now using really, really well and is actually close to being her preferred method. And we're also exploring grid software, actually worked best for Isla, which we'll explore also. But part of the translation journey of this information was about getting the concept of multimodality into all her various settings and with her various family members. So starting with her brothers, her dad, my extended family, so my parents, her grandparents. This is actually a photo of her great grandmother, so my nana, using books together, and she'd never done anything like that with Isla. And then Isla in her daycare, who is really taking charge of her communication system and showing her little friends, how to navigate through the pages of the book as well. So that was really important for our translation journey, was getting it into the hands of people who could actually help Isla by using the tools that she was using. The second bottom line actionable message is about gesture, and it boils down to use it, encourage it, put words to the gestures that you're seeing your children use, so translate it, and be responsive to those gestures. So there actually is quite a large body of evidence that really supports the role of gesture in terms of language development. It can be predictive of language development. It has a really significant role in terms of receptive vocabulary. We know that parents of children who gesture more end up having children who gesture more. And there's also evidence to suggest that gesture can actually help with shaping speech production and accessing vocabulary sort of from the brain that's stored as well. So it's a really good thing. And again, lots of lovely research that I was able to draw from there. But what it boiled down to in our family and in our community was helping people to see that Isla doing things like this, reaching out with a hand, was communicative, and we needed to put words to that gesture when we saw it so that she could follow that journey on and link it, really concretely with things that she could get or things that she could do in the future. This is actually Isla learning to count. So she was doing her little finger here, and we were, responding to that, but then modeling different ways that she could do that action. We spend a lot of time and still do talking to our boys about show her don't tell her. So use your actions, use your hands, be a bit animated with the way that you communicate. And that's one of my sons being particularly animated with the way that he's communicating there. But for us, it was also recognizing idiosyncratic things, or things that Isla was making up herself with her gestures and her signs. So, for example, she started doing this to us. And it took us weeks to work out what it was that she was trying to do. We ended up working out she was requesting Dora the Explorer, because in the Dora the Explorer intro, she does a lot of this hands up sort of position. And so Isla had latched onto what her hands were doing there and created her own little gesture and eventually her own little sign that represented that concept. So we had to learn it for her. Next message that was really important to me and to our has become for our family is this idea of using language stimulation techniques as a strategy. So I didn't want to get locked into calling it aided language stimulation or unaided language stimulation. For me, the goal was about building her language and being responsive to her language needs, irrespective of the mode of communication that we ended up using to support that, be it signing, be it her aided AAC systems as they change. And for us, the concept of enhanced milieu teaching was actually really, really important. So I'll show you a little bit about what that is. These concepts on the left are what's captured in that. It's arranging the environment around the child. It's being responsive to what she's showing us. It's being conscious and really careful about the targets for language that we have and modeling those targets. About expanding, extending on language, and keeping it within that zone of what comes next, for Isla's communication. So I knew about that as a speech pathologist, but my family didn't, and her daycare didn't, and all those other settings didn't. So it was about saying, when she's doing her Montessori work, she goes to a Montessori daycare. What opportunities can you find to extend, to be with her, extend her language, expand her language, look at what she's interested in, and give her the next steps? For us, it means following her into very, very strange places like the toy box rather, pulling up the chair and sitting there ready with the signs, with the aided AAC systems, so that modelling and augmented modelling of language can actually happen. It also means strategically leaving resources like the Getting Started with Keyword Sign book in various places around our home. So next to the toy box, in the kitchen, a copy's gone to daycare, etc., so that people have access to the resources that they need. And the final one for us was really about literacy. So I wanted people around Isla to know that our expectation is that she'll engage with literacy experiences, that she will read in some way, shape, or form, that she will write, that she may learn to spell and decode and do all of those things that we really want to see happen. So it's about ways to get that early literacy environment happening in our home and in the various settings. And again, there's some really great literature that talks about the importance of that, but also ways to do that. And I obviously looked at some Down syndrome literature as well. But that means books that are easily accessible from really early on. And even if you read them upside down, you're learning about print conventions, etc. It was about, for us, getting books that had lots of repeated lines in them and using, the keyword sign line drawings to supplement the illustrations, so that her brothers, her dad, her grandparents who were reading with her could actually access the signs at the same time and get that practice, that repetition in there. We've got to love Emma Wiggle and everything she's done in terms of bringing sign into a mainstream, arena. So we use the fingerspelling alphabet all the time with Isla. She can sign the ABC song, using the fingerspelling alphabet, but we're also starting to spell words for her using it as well. So her name and mummy and, words around her environment too. Down syndrome literature tells us actually that children are very visuospatial and actually respond quite well to whole word reading strategies in addition to other strategies. So giving her access to flashcard type things that have a picture. We can put the sign to them, but she also sees the printed word around her as well, was really important. So I realise I'm out of time, but this is very much about integrating what I knew from the literature, finding ways to make it resonate with the people, I guess, in the places and the spaces that are important to her, and sticking to what best practice says to us. So committing to that and persisting with that. So very happy to answer any questions, or if I'm out of time, connect with people a little bit later to talk about that.
I think you technically are out of time. If anyone's got a burning question, put your hand up with that little icon up the top, the little hand and the smiley face. I'll just give people a few seconds for that. Otherwise, yes. Azil?
Yeah, it's Asil. Hey, thank you so much. That was very informative. I just have a quick question. When did you know it was the right time to introduce the signs for the letters?
Good question. Look, bottom line really, Asil, is I didn't. But because Isla did a lot of her sign learning through songs, we were actually doing the ABC song and she was seeing it on the Wiggles and in various places from quite early on. And through imitation of that and seeing it in a lot of repeated sort of context, she eventually worked out how to do them. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the signs now are prompting her to start making some of the letters. And we also do it phonemically as well. So rather than A, B, C, we also go A, B, K, D, so that she's hearing that letter sound correspondence as well, but using the gesture and the sign to scaffold that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Pleasure.
All right. While I hate doing it, I think we do have to finish this session. Thank you, Leigha, so much. It was great to understand how you as a researcher and academic and speech pathologist and keyword sign presenter have translated all of that into what do you do day to day. So wonderful. Thank you. Now's the time that if you want to jump streams, do it, please. And we'll move on to introducing the next presenter. Okay. So the second session in this stream is Anita Wen talking about her research on speech pathologist knowledge and application of keyword sign. Anita, I might just, for the sake of brevity, and we always run out of time, I might just let you say whatever you feel you need to say about yourself and then start off the presentation.
Will do. Trust me, there's not much to talk about myself. I've literally just graduated not long ago, so I don't have much experience. I am working as a pediatric speech pathologist, and this is one of my pretty much uni project that I had to do. But it's a great honor to be here and present my findings to everyone. So, yeah. Let's jump right into it. So, hi everyone, my name is Anita, and the topic of my research is speech pathologist knowledge and application of keyword sign, conducted by myself and Dr. Rebecca Sutherland, who is in the audience today. So, what do we know about speech pathologist knowledge and implementation of keyword sign now? First of all speech and language pathologists in Australia must have adequate knowledge and skills in multimodal communication, but there are not quite many specific requirements around keyword sign per se. Second of all, keyword sign training is needed in order to meet the needs of people with complex communication needs as well as their communication partners' needs. Plus, speech pathologists need to understand the barriers and facilitators of AAC used to allow for effective implementation. Therefore, we aim to investigate these domains to help speechies to implement keyword sign more effectively and maximize the positive outcome of the intervention. Oops. Sorry. We've done a literature review which covered a couple of areas, including speech pathologist knowledge of keyword sign, facilitators and barriers and identified by speech pathologists, which includes their experience, their training, as well as communication partners' attitudes towards keyword signing. And the last area was keyword sign training, including the effectiveness of one-day keyword sign training. What are the other forms of potential keyword sign training forms, such as conferences, educational activities, professional developments, and so on, as well as some of the barriers to effective keyword sign training, such as time and money. So what does the literature tell us? First of all, there has been limited research on speech pathologists and others who are involved in teaching keyword sign. During our research, we did find quite a lot of research around keyword sign users and communication partners' experience with keyword signs, but really rarely do we find topics discussed from a species perspective. Research that has focused on speech pathologists' involvement in keyword sign has indicated limited keyword sign knowledge and desire to learn more about low-tech AAC, especially the high-tech AAC is the trendy one now. Then speech pathologist experience, knowledge, confidence, and attitude, they all contribute to their decision when it comes to selecting keyword sign as a potential treatment option for the clients. And lastly, the single-day keyword sign training has resulted in very positive outcomes for communication partners to learn how to sign, although the numbers did decrease after the workshop. So some of the gaps in the research, like I've mentioned, there are limited recent research around the implementation of keyword sign from a species perspective. There was a lack of specificity, so a lot of research sort of focused on AAC in general or low-tech AAC, but not focusing on keyword sign. Very rare do we find research that only focus on keyword sign. And a small sample size was noticed as well. For example, for the effectiveness of one-day training, there were only one speechie participated in the research, along with other people like teachers and support workers and parents. So what are we aiming to do from then? We aim to explore the speech pathologist keyword sign knowledge, as well as the facilitators and barriers identified by the speechie before or during keyword sign intervention, as well as keyword sign training opportunities and their relevant keyword sign training experiences. How did we do it? Dr. Sutherland and I designed a 24-item online questionnaire and advertised it, distributed on different social media platforms, and we have received a great number of 105 speeches. The responses from those speeches from all across Australia, which is absolutely amazing, and the data underwent quantitative and thematic analysis. A little bit about the demographic. So among those 105 speeches, most of them, the majority of them work with children only. There were about 32% work with both children and adults. There were 3 of them who was working with adults only, and most of them work at private practices as well as public health sectors. Most of them come from New South Wales and Victoria. Unfortunately, we didn't hear back from anyone in the Northern Territory, but that's no problem. Years of experience, we've had a great number of respondents who has been working as a speechie for about 6 to 20 years, some great numbers of speechies who have been working for over 20 years, and a great distribution of new graduates and those who have been working for about 5 or less years. So what have we found out about the use and knowledge as well as confidence when it comes to keyword sign delivery? About 83% of the participants are currently using keyword sign, and the majority of those are using keyword sign with about 1 to 10 clients. We had one respondent who is using keyword sign with more than 50 clients at the moment. Please let me know who you are if you are in the audience today, because that's just absolutely incredible. And most report at least some knowledge of keyword signing. But if we have a look at the table, the number of people who reported very limited knowledge and those who reported good working knowledge is about the same. So we do see a gap there, and there's potential room for improvement to reduce those very limited knowledge as well. So what about the competency level? Most clinicians feel quite confident about who they would recommend keyword signs to, and they're mostly confident in the keyword sign delivery skills. Most feel like the knowledge is quite sufficient, but as we can see on the table again, those who strongly agree with that their keyword sign knowledge is sufficient is again, almost the same as those who disagree with it. So we do see a gap, and is quite consistent with the keyword sign knowledge as well. So maybe there is a chance for us to try to improve those people who strongly agree with that their knowledge is sufficient and they're very confident with the keyword sign delivery. And the vast majority would like to receive more training, regardless of how confident they are of their keyword sign knowledge. So speaking of training, most participants learn about keyword sign through the traditional 1 to 2 day workshops, and it has been evident to be very effective. But about 30% reported self-directed learning, and some other ones reported that they've undertaken keyword sign presenter training as well as Alston training. So where did our respondents access those training? The majority learned keyword sign through professional development workshop. As I mentioned, the 1 to 2 day workshop was really helpful. More than 30% learned through self-directed learning, such as through online articles or online learning. What interests me the most on this table is the number of people who reported they have access to keyword sign training at university level during undergraduate and postgraduate is quite low. So would there be potentially an opportunity to offer more speech pathology student training, keyword sign training, so that they are more ready to deliver keyword sign therapy before they graduate? And one thing that we know about one of the barriers to keyword sign training was money and time. And hopefully, if we could put that as a part of the course, we could solve those problems for them as well. In the survey, we asked the speeches, who would you recommend keyword sign to? We have a couple of, we have categorized the responses to 3 different groups. And the first one is language difficulty. So those who are minimally verbal or nonverbal, or with some complex communication needs. The second group was speech-related difficulties, so poor intelligibility, CATs, and some speechy has highlighted that where keyword sign can be really helpful when the clients start to feel quite frustrated when they can't communicate very effectively. And lastly, that client with specific disabilities as well. And move on to facilitators and barriers. This part is really exciting. This is when we did the thematic analysis, and we have categorized the themes to about 3 themes for facilitators. And the first one is timing. So a lot of speeches feel that keyword sign can be introduced at any time, at any stage of the therapy with anyone. There's just no bad time to introduce keyword sign at all. But some speeches reckon that we do need to build a good rapport with the family before we introduce it. Maybe we have to take about 1 to 2 sessions so we have a good background knowledge and adequate rapport to suggest keyword sign. And we are going to elaborate on this point later when we talk about the communication partner factors as well. So the second theme is the client factors. So with those clients who are very limited, with very limited communication, or when they're feeling that frustration with lack of verbal communication, is probably a good time to introduce keyword sign as well. And when the speeches has noticed that the clients are showing signs of readiness, so when they're already creating signs or utilizing gestures to help with their communication, or when the speeches notice that they have really good motor imitation skills, as well as they're more of a visual learner, it can be a great opportunity to introduce keyword sign intervention as well. The third theme is communication partner factors. So parents do have to be open-minded when it comes to introducing keyword sign, or at least they need to be open to follow it following a thorough explanation and introduction from a speech pathologist. Parents' engagements were very crucial. High level of parent motivation and commitment could help with creating this sign-friendly environment to the child, so then they can slowly generalizing that skill into their everyday communication as well. Move on to the barriers. This one is quite similar to the facilitators, just on the other end of the spectrum. So the first one is client factors. So speech pathologists reported that they might be a bit more hesitant if they've noticed the clients have significant physical disabilities. This one is quite straightforward. All clients with limited communicative intent. So if they have poor joint attention or they're not quite responding to keyword sign modeling that well, the speeches might have to reconsider their decision of continuing keyword sign intervention or introducing it. And the last one is for those who indicated preference for other forms of communication. Now, for this part, they might just prefer verbal communication, or they don't really feel like doing signing, or they do prefer some other ways, other AAC approach. So we do have to respect their decision as well. The second part of the barrier is, again, communication partner factors. So speeches are less likely to introduce keyword sign when the parents are holding a strong view against it. From the responses that we've collected, we did find a couple of speeches reported that some parents might have misinterpreted the introduction of signing as speeches have given up on their children's verbal communication. So, you know, without a thorough, detailed explanation of what keyword sign is, they might hold a really strong view against it. And that again reinforced the importance of speech's role in this, and the way that they build rapport with the family and explain what keyword sign is and how it works, to help with the communication as well. And the last one is when the communication partner are unable to support keyword sign, that could be the greatest barrier as well. For example, when a teacher is not quite interested in learning or using keyword sign in a classroom, the parents might be utilizing it at home, but there's no opportunity for the child to generalize that skill in a different environment, and that could be quite tricky. Or when the parents are not motivated or committed to use keyword sign on a daily basis, again, that might result in a less successful keyword sign intervention as well. So overall, the speech pathologists mostly feel confident in the knowledge, but the majority of them want to learn more about it. Most people could access the traditional 1 to 2 day workshops, and that has been very helpful. Most of the time is through professional development, but we do see opportunities exist for more training at university levels. And client factors and communication partner factors can both be barriers and facilitators when it comes to keyword sign intervention. The research had a lot of limitations. It is more likely to have attracted those who are already interested in keyword signing. We've made it really clear when we advertise it on social media platforms that it is focusing on keyword signs. So that could potentially impact the results that we receive for keyword sign knowledge level as well as competency level as well. So when we're going through the data analysis, we did found that some questions were quite optional. It is a massive survey. It's got 24 items. Some questions might just be a little bit repetitive. So we have received a lot of same as above or a decent amount of dropout rate for our survey as well. It is weighted towards pediatric population, as we can see from the demographic information. The majority of the respondents are working with children only, so we might have missed out on some really valuable information from those who are working with adult population. And that would conclude my presentation. I'd like to give my thanks to all of the speech pathologists who participated in the survey and contributed really valuable information. I'd also like to thank Dr. Rebecca Sutherland, who helped me through planning, executing and analysing my research, and encouraging me to be a part of this amazing seminar. Is a huge thing for a new grad like me, and I am really honoured to be here. And that's all my references. I'm open to any questions, suggestions, or discussions. Thank you.
You're on mute, Libby.
All right, so we do have a question, Kiara. Can you take yourself off mute like I didn't and ask a question? Okay, Kiara, see if you can sort that out. Marion, I think you've got your hand up too.
Hi, no, sorry, I don't have my hand up. I'm just figuring out how to take it down. Thank you.
All right, Kiara, can you get a question over to us? Otherwise, I think we probably need to wind up this session and move into the next one. All right, let's move on. Anita, thank you. That was fascinating. and keep doing research. Okay, thank you. Jump sessions now if you want to go to another stream, and we'll move into the next presentation. All right. Okay, so the next session in this stream is Leigha Dark, again presenting on behalf of her co-researchers. I'm thinking a lot of people have been in this stream for a bit, so I won't do the same introduction again. Leigha, just take it away.
Thanks, Libby. Yeah, so I'm presenting today on behalf of Rachel Maiden, who was an honours student of mine from a couple of years ago. She was at Australian Catholic University and is now out there working in practice in Queensland. And she was co-supervised by Nisreen El Shafwati. So quite similar to Anita's work, Rachel was actually looking at how speech pathologists in Australia teach keyword sign to individuals. So what instructional strategies do they use once they've decided upon with the family keyword sign as an intervention method? We know about keyword sign now with the particular emphasis on simultaneous use of speech and manual sign. We do know from the literature that success with any form of AAC, be it unaided or aided, is dependent not only on selection and appropriate selection of that AAC, but also on the instruction that is given to support implementation of that AAC across multiple contexts. And that instruction can take lots of different forms depending on what the goal or the focus is. So it could be linguistic or language-based in nature. It could be about social use of a particular system or for interaction. It could be actually about instruction around how to use, the system, or it could be about problem solving and making decisions in, actual real world contexts about how to use it. And speech pathologists will recognise those as the domains of communicative competence as well. Again, we know from the literature that augmented input and other terms somewhat synonymous with that is considered best practice. So using whatever AAC system within and across naturalistic contexts is really what we're aiming for. And actually that communication partner training is a really critical part of any instructional package that goes along with an AAC system selection. But there's very little evidence out there about exactly what is it that speech language pathologists do when they are teaching or when they are instructing people, be they individuals, be they their families, be they their communication partners, on actually how to use keyword sign. And we also don't know much about the factors that influence decision making of speech pathologists and what brings them to actually suggesting or using keyword sign. So that was the focus of Rachel's research, and she wanted to explore how speech pathologists made decisions about what particular techniques or instructional approaches they would use, and also look at ways in which these were either consistent or perhaps not consistent with the best available evidence on AAC already out there in the field. So she used a mixed methods design and put together an online survey in her first phase. And then followed that up with in-depth telephone interviews with a smaller portion of people who completed that survey. We didn't get anywhere near the amazing response rate that Anita got, but we had 34 respondents for the survey, and they were advertised through professional networks primarily, so Speech Pathology Australia and the Keyword Sign Australia network, not so heavily on social media, so maybe that's a factor there. And of those 34 respondents, we had 6 who gave us a separate consent process to join us in a telephone interview. And in fact, some took place over Zoom as well. So just very quickly about the participants, I've reported here just the most frequently selected options. So most people were in the 3 to 5 year range after graduating, so years in the profession. But we had a range from 1 all the way through to 25 plus years, which was great. Most respondents worked in an NGO, so non-government or not-for-profit type sector, like a disability organisation, or also in private practice. Again, our respondents were primarily working with paediatric populations, so school age and preschool being the two age groups most commonly selected. Some of the conditions or presentation: autism spectrum disorder, very high in terms of representation there, developmental disability, but also, as Anita's work showed, developmental language disorder and speech sound disorders featuring quite prominently too. Years using keyword sign, again, the two most commonly selected options were about 3 to 5 years, but then again, a group who'd been using keyword sign for quite a number of years, so 16 to 20. And moving my thing there, 94% had a basic qualification in keyword sign, and almost half had also done presenter training. So again, we've got a captive audience. We've got people who are using and who are committed to keyword sign. In terms of some questions about where people were using or providing keyword sign instruction, primarily it was in a clinic setting. I was a little surprised at this, so 78%, I must say, given what we know from the evidence around naturalistic settings and really getting some context-specific supports in place. But it was nice to see that that was also reflected in people who were going to a person's home or to the preschool or daycare or school. 100% of people were providing instruction to parents of the children, which is great to see. So that education and training coming in, good number directly to the individual as well as to educators and paid support workers. And this one I found interesting. So we asked, over a 12-month period, how much time would you spend actually providing keyword instruction, to your client group or to an individual client? And by far the largest response was for 1 to 10 hours over 12 months. Followed closely by 11 to 20 hours. And that's a good, 70-odd% of our population. So people are getting 20 hours, and in some cases that's including the 6-hour workshop that people do in basic keyword sign training. There was a range from less than 1 hour, don't know how you might do that, all the way through to 100 hours. So really showing that there's some great diversity out there in terms of what people are doing or able to do. And yes, people said, what we do actually varies. So some people only attend a workshop and that is my keyword sign instruction, whereas others in their whatever packages they might have for funding can do one-to-one intervention. There are operational limitations on how many clients can be seen and perhaps for how long, depending on the service. But actually a lot of the support really needs to come in terms of coaching almost to do modelling well in natural contexts. And that was just from the survey, and then we were able to follow up on some of those points as well. So when we asked what instructional techniques or approaches do you use to teach sign, and we gave people a list and asked them to select as many as was applicable. Very promising that modelling of speech and sign came up there. Everybody was doing some form of modelling, which is great to see. Lots of those indirect naturalistic approaches coming through, so creating communication opportunities, using things like expectant pause, encouraging imitation. Communication training, partner training was up there, but only 22 out of the 28 participants said that they were doing that, and yet 100% of people said they were providing instruction to parents. So I think in some people's mind, communication partner training maybe is not parent training, but a broader group perhaps. So that warrants a little bit of exploration just in terms of how people are thinking about that. Use of language stimulation techniques, which is great. Not so much in a lot of the more the explicit or quite direct teaching models that we have. And interesting that people are not necessarily saying or recognizing that they're doing comprehensive packages of techniques, but are maybe picking one or two strategies, like, for example, modeling and language stimulation. So that was interesting. So the factors, really boil down to a balancing act. So what helps people or influences their decision making is balancing what's needed by the individual, their family, and their communication partners in the communities that they're in, but also with real logistical constraints like time available to individuals, funding resources, both within a service but also within a person's individual package, access to resources, access and understanding of evidence, and also feeling like that you've got the right skill to be able to provide the instruction needed. When we looked at the qualitative themes that came from both the survey and the follow-up interviews, we had 3 core themes emerging there, with some sub-themes attached to those and some sub-themes as well. So the first one being, how do people select instructional strategies? So they're really looking at individualising, responding, and going to familiar frameworks, be they theory or practice. So one participant said, I think it really depends on the child. So tailoring and individualising to the child and the situation, supporting educators to use visuals and keyword signs for transitions. And again, it's situation dependent, knowing what the family's goals are and being able to align to those, and thinking big picture. Communication is more than talking. So actually a lot of the energy goes into still supporting families and clients and communication partners to understand the repertoire and the spectrum that people have available to them for communication. Amy, as a participant, reflected that people responded better when it was customised or individualised. They saw themselves sticking with it because it was relevant and meaningful, and that certainly comes through in the literature as well. But then there's this tension with, knowing that we have to individualise. How many times do you make a separate, handout or a separate resource that someone can put up on their wall, so that they really can get the repetition that's needed, in the context that is specific to them. In our second theme, it was about types of instructional strategies. So by far, it was about modelling. It was about how that's balanced with workshop attendance, and then emphasis on creating a signing environment. So, recognising, as Erica did here, that a lot of the work, a lot of the instruction is about teaching. It's about coaching. It's about providing education and training, particularly around the importance of modelling and consistency of sign use across and within settings. And Bruce says, there is challenges, but really when you can get integrated use of keyword sign across multiple environments, that's gold. That's what we really should be aiming for and promoting as an evidence-based instructional strategy. And again, the most important thing and the most effective thing is teaching in context. So teaching around an individual, how they can support and model through the day, and tapping into those motivational factors. So what's important? What's fun? What are the songs? What are the activities? So actually some active problem solving, with clients and their families and supports to get the best outcome. And then our final theme was around implementing. So what do people do to implement? And like Anita's work, we had lots of facilitators and barriers, and the same concept could in fact be a facilitator or a barrier, depending on the context. So responding and adapting to service changes, utilising and building professional networks and supports. Big one around creating a team around an individual. So getting people who were champions of that individual's communication and accessing resources as well. The more people that are signing, the better. So networking is a skill, and speech pathologists saw themselves as a conduit to broadening people's networks around an individual. Within obviously some organisational context, wanting to do whole school approaches, it's about currency of staff. So you start, you train everyone, half leave, you start again, it's a really iterative process, and that can feel tiring, and take a lot of resources as well. Margaret touched on the big elephant in the room at the time when we were doing this research, which was really about how do people balance what they know the evidence says they should be doing in terms of best outcomes with what the logistics are in their settings. So NDIS, billable hours, working within funding constraints, etc. It was a real tension that people were grappling with. And Bruce reiterates this by saying, in a 40-hour week, it's not uncommon that I would only have 12 to 15 contact hours, be they face-to-face or virtual, with clients. The rest is the paperwork, it's the planning, it's the additional work. So very real constraints that we recognised within those settings. Continually accessing professional development, so either in a self-directed way or formally through training, and recognising that a lot of families and other professionals really were experiencing barriers to actually getting access to qualified trainers and also to the resources they needed in an ongoing way. So, some creative problem solving, get some online webinars, and I know Keyword Sign Australia is on this. People want demonstrations. People want to see it being used so that they can take away and then apply those ideas in their own settings. So to finish up, speech pathologists are using a range of strategies, both indirect and direct. And these are approaches to support signing environments, a lot of emphasis on modelling, which is great, communication partner training, which is great, and looking at creative ways to create opportunities to embed keyword sign in natural settings. And what I really loved was the commitment people had to sort of tailoring keyword sign instruction to the needs of families. So that is really nice evidence-based practice. It is complex, it's influenced by lots of factors, but we can take maybe some of this information and think about our models of training, think about our approaches to service delivery and the way that we implement our keyword sign interventions, and prioritise ways to keep our interventions sustainable. So actually, building capacity so that once we're not in the person's life, it will actually still continue. And I'm buzzing on the other end, and thankfully that's the end of my presentation. So happy to take any questions. Thank you. I think you're on mute.
Muted, Libby. Unmute.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you, Leigha, very much. And if you have a question, please use the icon up the top to raise your hand. We've got a couple of minutes left for questions before we need to start the next session.
I have a question.
Merrin, yes.
Hi, Leigha.
Hello, Merrin. That's a name that I recognise. Merrin was one of my lovely students at ACU.
I just have a question about implementing it with families, and how much is it a barrier that the families recognise other people in the person's life won't understand the keyword sign? So do they want to bother because they're like, oh, no one's going to understand them anyway?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I can only speak from, in this case, the perspectives of the participants and what they shared with us. It was definitely mentioned as a barrier, not to the extent that people wouldn't do it at all and wouldn't even raise it because they're prospectively thinking that this is going to be a big problem, but in trying it and then finding that actually it wasn't gaining the traction that they hoped, and in fact a lot of time, resource, energy and perhaps frustration was going into a strategy that really wasn't taking hold, gave the speech pathologist pause to think, is this the right thing for now, for this context, for this family? Are there other ways or other considerations that we need to explore in order to get a little bit more success?
Yeah, because with like AAC, like communication devices, it outputs an actual word that other people can understand. So it's a bit easier for communication partners to interact with it. But yeah, it's interesting to consider.
It is a good point. One of the things that, and I didn't put it in the presentation, I won't spend too long, but one of the things people said was that they did actually have to spend a lot of time in the knowledge translation space, getting people's heads around, actually what is involved in doing keyword sign. It's not just signing, it's actually recognizing all the back end supports and commitment and energy and consistency that has to go in it as being integral to the approach. And you do need to know it up front so that you can buy in an informed sort of way. And that was things that people talked about as being really important. Yes.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Okay, I think we need to bring this session to a close. Again, Leigha, thank you so much for your presentation and the information. Move to a different stream now if you want to go there. And I'd like to, well, I hardly need to introduce Dr. Andy Smidt because she's been around throughout the day. You would, I think, probably already know she's been pivotal in the organisation of this event. And Andy is a research consultant to Keyword Sign Australia. And Andy, just for the sake of any spare seconds we might save, I'll let you say whatever you feel to say about yourself.
Helps if you turn the microphone on first. We're also good at Zoom. The team is a bit challenging. All right, no, I don't need to say anything else. I don't think. I'm at the University of Sydney. We've got a couple of research projects happening at the moment from the University of Sydney, which is really nice. And I just tweeted to say I'm so excited about the research situation in Australia at the moment for Keyword Sign, listening to all these students and honours projects and small scale projects, but we're creating this pathway for research. And that really is my goal in terms of being research consultant to Keyword Sign Australia, is to promote and support research. So the honours students who've finished your project, if you want to think about doing more research, come talk to us. And we have a team of people who can support you and guide you and help you think about research questions and methods and so on. So please come and talk to us. All right, so I'm going to try and share my screen. And let's see if this works. There are two ways to do this. I'm going to see if it'll work this way. If it doesn't, I'll go back to the other way. No, it's not going to work. Okay, let me do it the other way. Okay, that way works. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I now can't see any of you, but that's okay. All right, so what I want to talk about today is really the word aided, okay? And what does that mean? And what is the difference between aided and unaided in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of, particularly in terms of research? So, oops, okay, so I'm going to ask you to do something, because you know how I like to do these things that are interactive. So what I want you to do is take your phone and go onto the QR code, and I no longer have to explain to people since COVID what a QR code is, okay? And I want you to type into Mentimeter, which is what you're going to go into, what is unaided AAC? You can also just click on or type into a browser, menti.com, and use the code that's there as well, which is 2391 5993. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to do that. And if it's not working, please somebody turn your microphone on and tell me that. Oh, there we go. It's working. Unaided is not electronic. Okay, cool. What else? Let's see what else we get. Low tech. What is AAC? AAC, which does not need, I think that T is probably tech. Gesture. Using your body, body language, expression, doesn't require a battery, manual signing. All right, cool. Signing, gesture, technology. The things that are the largest and in the middle are the ones that most people are saying. So using your body and body language are the things that are coming up. And I guess my point is that we call manual signing unaided, but in fact, as we've already been saying today, in order to do this well, you need to learn a system, a language that is not just your body language and using your body and facial expressions and gesture. And I would agree that all of that stuff is probably unaided, because anybody who's got hands and a face and facial expressions can do that with no extra learning involved. Once we add another language, I'm wondering whether we're doing ourselves out of something important if we call it all of that unaided. So I'm not going to give you any answers today. I'm just going to tell you the things that I've been thinking about. So unaided modes of communication, according to Asher, include non-spoken means of natural communication. So yes, gesture and facial expressions, as well as manual signs. And of course, they had ASL. I've put Auslan on my slide. These modes of communication often require adequate motor control and communication partners who can interpret the intended message. So that links really nicely to all the papers we've heard today, including from the OTs, and lots of stuff talking about communication partners and how we train them. I guess my question comes back to, do we need to categorize the learning of another language, the learning of Auslan, as something additional to those body language things that we already have? So we could say unaided includes the nonverbal communicative behaviors that arise spontaneously in communities without needing a formal code or decode book. If it involves learning a set of symbols that are not familiar to the majority of society, could it be considered as a kind of aided AAC, and what would the benefits be? So I'm going to start off by talking about aided language stimulation, also known as augmented input and various other things. And the adults who plan and adapt the language environment of children who use alternative means of communication should be providing models of language use in their own form. Moreover, these should be used for genuine communicative purposes in all types of everyday settings and when the children are very young. I'm just sitting here, every time I heard any of the presenters earlier today saying something, the parents this morning, Leigha a little while ago, I'm thinking, yes, Anita, and your comments from your speech pathologists, yes, we need to do it early. We're talking about communication partners, but this statement here from Renner is not about, it's not about keyword sign, it's about aided AAC. Okay, so why does that definition not include keyword sign? I'm giving you a whole lot of quotes that I'm sure you already know, but perhaps they are just food for thought. Aided language stimulation is a language stimulation approach in which the facilitator points out picture symbols on the child's communication display in conjunction with all ongoing language stimulation. Through the modeling process, the concept of using the pictorial symbols interactively is demonstrated for the individual. Could we rewrite that quote to include or signs? Okay, maybe it's less about the gestures and more about the signs, but I actually think that if we're talking about aided language stimulation, everything that we call modeling, we call it creating a signing environment. We use all these terms, but we can't put ourselves under that umbrella at the moment of being aided language stim. Okay. This is the quote that somebody was talking about earlier. From the moment a baby is born, they hear and respond to the spoken word. We bombard that infant with language for the first 12 to 18 months of their lives. During that time, we do not expect that they will utter a single understandable word. So we know that using the language around the person is going to be the way that they learn that language. And exactly as Megan said so beautifully earlier, that keyword signs are caught, not taught, that they are part of the environment in which the person is functioning. The average 18-month-old child has been exposed to 4,380 hours of oral language at a rate of 8 hours a day from birth. A child who has a communication system and receives speech or language therapy 2 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes will reach the same amount of language exposure in 84 years. So we know, what do we know about aided language stimulation? The idea is that you're going to model language by using the same expressive communication system the student uses, and you're going to model just one step above. So you don't want to be all the way up here with this red arrow, you want to be around the green one over here so that we're just one step above. Does this feel like it's appropriate to what we're talking about in terms of keyword sign? Okay, so what does the research say? Now, this is all about aided language modeling or aided language stimulation. This is not about keyword sign. There are a number of papers. Alan talks about aided language model and says that a treatment can be considered promising if it's been shown to be effective across at least 5 single cases. And he said that aided language stimulation can be considered to be promising. Studies have looked at aided language modeling to improve expressive skills, but not receptive. There was another systematic review by Biggs et al., who looked at aided language modeling, aided AAC modeling. They had similar results. Sennett in 2016 looked at AAC modeling. Similar results. Okay, AAC modeling for children who were beginning communicators consistently produced large effects on language across 4 domains: pragmatic, semantic, syntactic, and morphological. What I want to do is I want to bring this literature in and say, can we demonstrate that aided language modeling, AAC modeling, using keyword sign can still produce those effects? And I want to rely on that literature as well in terms of informing what we're currently doing. So all of the studies to date are on those who are already symbolic and using AAC. And what do we know about those who are not yet symbolic communicators? And I think some of the things that we've said today about families preferring keyword sign when they're younger, about the fact that Nicola was saying about, you know, putting your hands into the space where the person is looking. There are some real advantages for people who are not yet symbolic that we might want to be using keyword sign. And so we need to think also about ALS, aided language stimulation, augmented input, all of those terms if we're thinking about keyword sign. So this is a really, really recent paper. I get very excited when I find recent papers and I send them to people. So I did send this one to Libby. It is from 2021 and it was looking at the effects of AAC on receptive language skills. And they did this scoping review. They looked at both aided and unaided, and there were 16 studies. They had 55 children for unaided that went from 1981 to 1996. So I can't see anybody's faces in the way that this team thing works, but I'm assuming you're all nodding at me because that's really quite old. And we're going, okay, so what's happened since 1996? Why are there not papers looking at unaided? They said that they only addressed word level acquisition and comprehension skills. So they were really only looking at whether the person was learning single words. There was insufficient evidence that augmented input is effective, okay, for unaided AAC. The lack of evidence of effective interventions within unaided AAC is particularly concerning, as it's been reported that early intervention with children who are candidates for AAC is conducted primarily by using unaided AAC. So we know that early language intervention is often unaided, and we know that there's not a lot of research out there, and that the research that's out there is both old and not collecting the data that we need. In terms of aided, from this same paper, 134 children compared to 55. It went from 2000 to 2017, a vastly different period of time. Newer research, stronger research, conclusive results. And they basically talked about interventions for improving receptive language, aided language stim, pointing to pictures while verbal language stimulation, aided language modeling, pointing to an environmental referent and then within 2 seconds to a graphic symbol of the referent while simultaneously speaking the word, and more. So there was lots and lots and lots of research out there using aided language modeling and stimulation for aided, but not for unaided. So how do we intervene in keyword sign? We talk about creating a signing environment. What does that mean? We don't sit and teach children to sign in a clinical setting. At least I hope we don't, although I think Anita's paper was saying some people do. So we are doing aided language stimulation. Well, we're doing, I don't know what you call AAC language stimulation, perhaps. Okay, we have to think about the trifocus framework, which I hope some of you will know about. The first, we think only about the learner, the partner, and the environment. We know that AAC and good intervention and research is looking at those 3 components. We are doing that. We are teaching communication partners and we're looking at the environment. We are doing all the things I would want us to be doing in terms of the trifocus framework, but the literature is very limited. There's really one paper that I'm aware of that looked at, or reasonable studies that looked at keyword sign, and that was from Wright, Kaiser, Rakowski, and Roberts from 2013. And they looked at enhanced media teaching blended with something they call JASPER. JASPER is joint attention, symbolic play, and emotional regulation. So this is Anne Kaiser's work from America, and this program called JASPER is her stuff, and there's lots written about it. But they wanted to use enhanced media teaching alongside JASPER. They used children with Down syndrome and they added signs. So the infusion of manual signs with verbal models within a framework of play, joint attention, and naturalistic language teaching appears to facilitate development of expressive sign and word communication in young children with Down syndrome. And again, a lot of what you were saying, Leigha, about your work and family life with Isla was ringing bells for me around some of this. But this is one very small scale study, and I just think we need more of it. There is another fairly recent paper that did a survey of preschool teachers about AAC, and they found that of the children in this setting, 22% were using object exchange, 34% were line drawings, etc., etc. 49% of children, so they surveyed the preschool children about the preschool teachers about the children they work with. 49% of those children were using sign language. Okay. In terms of teacher training, nearly 80% had received training for PECS, 45 had received training for sign language, and only 25 had received speech generating device training. So we know it's going on. We know it's out there, but we're not seeing compelling evidence in the literature. So that is kind of the end of my slideshow, which if I hopefully can now come back to, I don't know how to do this. How do I come back to the room that I'm supposed to be in?
The stop sharing cross thing, Andy, up the top.
Ah, okay, hang on, let me see if this works. No, that made me go smaller. I can't do that. I don't know what's happened to my, I've got you on a very mini thing, but I can't get back to a very big thing. Ah, let me try that. There we go, I'm back, sorry. Very confusing. I think my key message is that I think there needs to be more training, more research, that we need to think about aligning ourselves and perhaps writing and discussing ourselves as the keyword sign part, the adding the Auslan sign part, is something that I want us to do and to consider as potentially being aided, that we need something in the language there. So it's my ideas, my thinking, my reading in the research, and I'm really interested to hear your comments and perspectives. And if you have questions, I'm not sure I can answer them, but I'm happy to chat.
Okay, so if you've been around, you know how this works. Find the little icon up the top with the raised hand and the smiley face. Put your hand up. Kathy, ask a question or make a comment.
Thanks. That's okay. Thanks, Andy. It's Kathy Basterfield here, Andy. Interesting putting it into the context of thinking about what gets picked up in the literature. And we look at conferences and, you know, you rarely see a paper on unaided and it's like, oh, people aren't doing it. People aren't interested. Look at today, you know, how many people are here? We've run 3 streams today. It's not that it's not there. Yeah. And I think about the workshops that I run and think, you know, what we spend a lot of time doing is actually teaching how to teach language, how to do good language modelling. And by the way, we're now doing signing with it. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting concept to think, is this, you know, it's not aided, or is it aided? It's language stimulation. You know, it's really interesting thinking that, you know, is it a moving feast that we need to, versus if it stays, if we try and get ourselves ingratiated into the aided language stimulation space, we still become the very poor cousin.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. Happy to respond to that, or any comment you've got.
I don't think there are any answers, because, you know, calling something a different name is not necessarily going to change what it is. And I think that's what we're saying. But I think in some ways, if we say unaided AAC is the things that everybody can do and that you don't need to learn something new or have, I mean, and that's been one of our statements at the beginning of keyword sign workshops a lot, which is, you know, unaided, everything you need, you have about you when you get out of bed in the morning, you just need your 10 hands. And I'm hearing, you know, parents saying that as well. And I think that's great. My question is, do we need to say, however, if you're going to do this at this level, you are going to learn something new and you are going to have resources. Leigha was talking about having, you know, the red book around the different places for people to do, in much the same kind of way as we might say you need to have your symbols around the place for people to use them. I'm just wondering whether we should be putting ourselves into that space. I don't know.
Leigha, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, that's really interesting and I think helpful as a concept. I guess a counter question is it the aided, unaided term actually that is problematic? And then in fact, are we are we doing AAC in a multimodal way?
Yep.
And there is a whole range of different ways that we support or give people to communicate. So rather than using it sort of categorically, you know, I'm in the aided camp or I'm in the unaided camp, it's more about a continuum or a spectrum of supports for different settings, different purposes, etc. And I guess I'm with Kathy, and I think Sherry had a thumbs up there as well in terms of saying what we need to do well is the language stimulation bit. And what we need to convince people is that we're doing it with an overlay of AAC across that whole spectrum from the unaided to the aided continuum. So I'm appreciating the discussion around terminology. I want to put there that maybe we're focusing on the wrong term and it's the aided unaided that's causing some you know, tensions.
I mean, I think so. Nicola Grove, who was here this morning, said to me fairly recently, she said she presented at the recent ISAC online conference and there were 2 papers and hardly anybody came to her talk that were about unaided and why are we always the poor cousin? And I guess I'm trying to say, well, the poor cousin part might come from the expectation that you don't have to learn anything new in order to do it. And maybe what we need to be doing is to say this is complex and important and part of multimodal. And maybe the terminology, we need to just get rid of the aided and say we're doing AAC modeling.
No.
Okay, go, Sherry.
Sherry.
Oh, I was unmuted. Sorry. No. No.
No, go for it.
I would propose getting rid of AAC altogether, being in the I can't remember the camp word that you used there, but my camp is the camp that is outside the camp, because I work with people who don't use any symbolic systems, be it devices or symbolic gestures. They are often considered not to be AAC users at all. And I guess in Agoski we've been having lots of conversations around how do we make ourselves a community that is meaningful to all people with complex communication needs, irrespective, acknowledging that yes, there is specialist knowledge that is needed for people who use devices and people who use well, for everybody. There's specialist knowledge needed for everybody, and I also don't get why we use this term AAC when it's not a meaningful term to people who don't know about AAC. Like we've already said, there's a jargon brick wall when communication is just such a fluid, immense sea. But we're just sitting in the AAC.
Yes, okay. It's complex. I believe we could probably keep talking about this for quite some time longer. But I am aware we've got another session at 2:30 and we all need a little break, at least to go to the toilet. So sorry, Anne, I know you've got your hand up. I think we probably do need to stop it here. But thank you, Andy. I think all of these things need to continue to be discussed in a range of forums, I expect. You know, I'm very aware the AAC world is still relatively young. We're still sorting out what do we mean when we say anything, really. So we can contribute to the future in that. Thank you, everybody, for attending this stream or any of the sessions within, and hope to see you very soon in the final session.